You think you're paranoid. You think you're imagining things. You think that gut feeling twisting in your stomach is just insecurity talking, just your own broken trust bleeding into something innocent. But what if I told you that instinct is the only honest voice left in the room? Let me be clear from the start. This isn't about teaching you to become a detective in your own relationship. This isn't about turning you into some obsessive analyzer of every breath she takes. This is about respecting yourself enough to recognize when reality is being rewritten in front of you, and you're being asked to pretend you can't see it. Because the truth is, when a woman has just been intimate with someone else, her entire system shifts. Biology doesn't lie. Psychology doesn't lie. Energy doesn't lie. And if you've been paying attention to anything other than the fantasy you've been sold, you already know something is off. Here's what most men do when that feeling hits. They suppress it. They rationalize it away. They tell themselves they're being controlling, insecure, toxic for even noticing. They apologize for their own awareness, and that right there is the trap. You've been conditioned to distrust the one instrument that evolution spent millions of years perfecting, your ability to read behavioral cues, energetic shifts and incongruence. You've been taught that noticing is the same as being weak. But let me tell you something. Ignoring what you see doesn't make you strong. It makes you complicit in your own disrespect. And if you're someone who values truth over comfort, if you're tired of being told that your instincts are the problem, then make sure you subscribe right now, because this channel doesn't exist to tell you what feels good. It exists to tell you what's real. You're going to need these reminders when the world keeps trying to convince you that self-respect is optional. Hit that button. This is where men come to reclaim their clarity. So let's get into it. 8 signs that give away a woman who just slept with someone else. Not theories, not paranoia, observable, repeatable patterns rooted in psychology, biology, and behavioral science. And more importantly, what each one reveals about where you actually stand. Sign 1. She becomes hyper-affectionate out of nowhere. You walk in the door and suddenly she's all over you. Compliments you haven't heard in months. Touching you in ways that feel performative, not organic. She's laughing too hard at things that aren't funny. She's initiating intimacy with an urgency that doesn't match the temperature of your relationship over the last few weeks. And you feel it. Something about it feels compensatory. Because it is. This is guilt-driven overcompensation. When someone violates their own internal code, even if they've rationalized it, the subconscious kicks in with damage control. She's not being affectionate because she feels connected to you. She's being affectionate because she feels disconnected from herself. The behavior is an attempt to rebalance the cognitive dissonance. If she can make you feel good, if she can convince you everything is fine, then maybe she can convince herself. It's not about you. It's about her trying to manage the gap between who she wants to believe she is and what she just did. And here's the trap most men fall into. They take the affection at face value. They're so starved for attention, so desperate for things to feel normal again, that they accept the performance as reality. They think, see, everything's fine, I was just overthinking. But you weren't overthinking, you were under-responding. Because real affection doesn't spike out of nowhere. Real intimacy doesn't need to announce itself with fanfare. It's consistent. It's rooted. This is theater. Sign 2. She picks a fight over nothing. The smallest thing sets her off. You left a cup on the counter. You didn't text back fast enough. You said something in a tone she didn't like. Suddenly you're in a full-blown argument about something that wouldn't have registered last week, and the intensity doesn't match the trigger. You're confused because the reaction is disproportionate, and you're scrambling to figure out what you did wrong. Here's what's really happening. She's projecting. Guilt doesn't sit quietly. It ferments. It turns into irritability, defensiveness, blame. She's carrying something she can't process, and the easiest way to discharge that tension is to make you the problem. If she can reframe you as the bad guy, if she can create a narrative where you're difficult, neglectful, emotionally unavailable, then her actions feel justified. You're not dealing with a rational conflict. You're dealing with someone trying to rewrite the story so she's not the villain. And what do most men do? They engage. They defend themselves. They try to logic their way out of an emotional ambush. They apologize for things they didn't do just to restore peace. And in doing so, they hand over their frame. They accept the premise that they're the issue. But you're not the issue. You're the scapegoat. And every time you accept that role, you're training her that accountability is optional and blame is transferable. Sign 3. She suddenly needs space. She used to want to spend time with you. Now she's distant. She's got plans you weren't told about. She's on her phone more. She's emotionally checked out but physically still there. And the disconnect is suffocating. You ask if everything's okay, and she says she's fine, just needs a little space to think, to recharge, to process. And you give it to her, because you don't want to be controlling. But let's be honest about what space often means in this context. It's not about self-care. It's about creating distance so she doesn't have to face you. When someone is carrying guilt or secrecy, proximity becomes uncomfortable. Your presence is a mirror. Every time she looks at you, she's reminded of what she did, so she pulls back. Not because she doesn't care, but because she cares just enough to feel the weight of it, and not enough to come clean. And here's the cruel irony. The more space you give, the more she interprets it as weakness. She starts to see you as someone who doesn't set boundaries, doesn't ask hard questions, doesn't demand respect. The space becomes a testing ground. How much can she pull away before you say something? How long can she avoid you before you require her to show up? And if you never require it, she learns that you'll accept whatever version of her she offers, no matter how hollow. Sign 4. Her grooming habits change abruptly. She's putting in more effort than usual. New lingerie you haven't seen. A sudden interest in waxing, perfume, working out, dressing up when she's just going to the store. Or the opposite. She stops caring altogether. She's not trying to look good for you anymore, because the effort is already being allocated elsewhere, or because the shame has shut her down entirely. Appearance is tied to identity and attention. When a woman is investing energy into someone new, or has recently been with someone else, her self-concept shifts. She starts curating herself for a different audience. The change isn't about you, you're just collateral. You're the person who gets the version that's left over after she's already performed for someone else. And most men notice but don't say anything. They compliment the effort, hoping it means things are improving. Or they ignore the neglect, telling themselves it's not a big deal. But both responses miss the point. The change itself is the signal. Consistency is the language of commitment. When someone's patterns shift without explanation, they're operating in a different emotional ecosystem, and you're not the center of it anymore. Sign 5. She accuses you of cheating. Out of nowhere, she's questioning where you were, who you were with, why you're on your phone, why you smiled at that waitress. She's suddenly hyper-vigilant, suspicious, interrogating you about things that never mattered before. And you're blindsided because you've been loyal, transparent, consistent. So where is this coming from? Projection. When someone is doing something they know is wrong, they start to assume everyone else is doing it too. It's a psychological defense mechanism. If she can convince herself that you're also capable of betrayal, or that you're already betraying her, then her actions feel less singular, less damning. It levels the moral playing field. She's not uniquely bad. Everyone does it. You're probably doing it. So why should she feel guilty? This is one of the cruelest signs, because it puts you on trial for a crime you didn't commit. And the more you defend yourself, the guiltier you look in her framework. You're stuck in a lose-lose. If you get angry, you're defensive. If you stay calm, you're hiding something. The accusation isn't about finding the truth. It's about redistributing the shame. And if you let it continue, you'll spend so much time defending your innocence that you'll forget to ask why she's prosecuting you in the first place. Sign 6. She shares less emotionally. She used to tell you about her day, her thoughts, her feelings. Now conversations are surface level. She's polite but distant. There's no depth, no vulnerability, no real connection. You're living with someone who feels like a stranger wearing a familiar face. And when you try to go deeper, she deflects, changes the subject, or tells you she's just tired. Emotional withdrawal is one of the most reliable indicators of relational betrayal. When someone has crossed a line, they instinctively pull back their emotional investment. Sharing feelings requires honesty, and honesty means risk. If she opens up, she might slip, she might reveal something she shouldn't, so she shuts down. She becomes a curator of information, carefully managing what you know and what you don't. And here's what that does to you over time. It makes you feel crazy. You're in a relationship, but you're alone. You're physically next to someone who is emotionally gone, and because there's no hard evidence, you start questioning yourself. Maybe you're expecting too much. Maybe this is just how relationships evolve. Maybe you're being needy, but you're not. You're being gaslit by absence. The silence is the lie. And every day you accept it, you're choosing confusion over clarity. Sign 7. She suddenly changes her phone or privacy habits. Her phone used to sit on the table. Now it's face down, always in her hand, password protected in ways it wasn't before. She takes calls in the other room. She tilts the screen away when you walk by. She deletes messages. She's protective in a way that feels defensive, not reasonable. And when you mention it, she calls you paranoid, controlling, insecure. Let's be clear, privacy and secrecy are not the same thing. Privacy is about autonomy. Secrecy is about hiding. If someone's behavior around their phone changes dramatically, they're not protecting their privacy. They're protecting information. And that information is something they believe would damage the relationship if you knew. Period. Most men ignore this sign because they don't want to be that guy. They don't want to seem jealous or untrusting. But here's the truth. Trust isn't blind. Trust is earned through transparency and consistency. When transparency disappears, trust doesn't demand that you keep pretending. Trust demands that you ask why. And if the answer is deflection, anger, or accusation, then you already have your answer. People who have nothing to hide don't act like they do. Sign 8. The intimacy between you changes in quality, timing, or frequency. She either refuses intimacy altogether, citing headaches, stress, exhaustion, or she engages in it mechanically, like she's fulfilling an obligation. Or in some cases, she initiates more than usual, but it feels disconnected. She's physically there but mentally elsewhere. The energy is wrong. The rhythm is off. You feel it, but you can't name it. Sexual behavior is deeply tied to emotional and psychological state. When a woman has been intimate with someone else, the guilt, the comparison, the energetic residue, it all shows up in how she engages with you. She might avoid it because she can't stomach the hypocrisy. Or she might engage in it compulsively to prove to herself that nothing has changed. Either way, the authenticity is gone. You're not experiencing connection, you're experiencing management. And this is where a lot of men break, because sex is often the last thread of intimacy they're holding on to. When that feels wrong, everything feels wrong. But instead of confronting it, they blame themselves. They think they're not attractive enough, skilled enough, attentive enough. They try harder, they perform, they accommodate, and in doing so they become complicit in their own invisibility. Because the issue isn't your performance. The issue is her presence, and you can't perform someone back into integrity. Now let's talk about what all of these signs actually mean, not just individually, but collectively. Because the real pattern here isn't about any single behavior, it's about incongruence. It's about the gap between what someone says and what they do, between how they present and how they feel, between the relationship they're pretending to be in and the reality they're living. And here's the hard truth most men don't want to hear. If you're seeing multiple signs from this list, you're not paranoid, you're not insecure, you're not broken, you're aware. And awareness in a culture that profits from your confusion is an act of rebellion. But here's where most men go wrong. They collect evidence, they observe, they build a case in their head, and then they do one of two things. They either confront without clarity, turning into an emotional reactor, yelling, accusing, demanding explanations, or they stay silent, swallowing the disrespect because they're afraid of losing her, afraid of being wrong, afraid of being alone. Both paths are losing strategies. The reactor hands over his power by letting emotion dictate his next move. The silent endurer hands over his power by letting fear dictate his non-move. Neither response comes from a grounded place. Neither response reflects self-respect. So what's the alternative? First, you stop trying to be liked by someone who's disrespecting you. You stop performing empathy for someone who's weaponizing your kindness. You stop managing her emotions while she disregards yours. That ends today. Second, you reclaim your frame. Your frame is not just a mindset, it's a boundary. It's the standard you set for how you will be treated and what you will accept in your life. When you notice incongruence, you don't ask permission to address it. You don't couch it in apologies. You state what you see, calmly, clearly, without anger, but with certainty. I've noticed X, Y, and Z. Something has changed. I need you to be honest with me about what's going on. You're not accusing, you're observing, and you're requiring truth. Third, you prepare to walk. And I don't mean as a bluff, I mean as a real internalized standard. If she cannot or will not be honest with you, if she deflects, gaslights, blames or doubles down on secrecy, you leave. Not because you're petty, not because you're unforgiving, but because a relationship without honesty is not a relationship. It's a performance you're subsidizing with your self-respect. And here's what most men miss. Walking isn't about punishment. It's about alignment. It's about refusing to participate in a dynamic that erodes you. It's about recognizing that you cannot build anything real on a foundation of lies. And it's about valuing yourself enough to choose truth over comfort, clarity over false peace. Now let's talk about the man who doesn't get caught in these patterns in the first place. The man who doesn't ignore signs. The man who doesn't rationalize disrespect. What does he look like? He's grounded. He knows his worth isn't tied to whether she stays or leaves. He's built a life that doesn't collapse when a relationship ends. He has purpose. He has standards. He has options. Not because he's playing games, but because he's invested in himself. He's present but not desperate. He loves fully but doesn't lose himself. He pays attention, not obsessively, but intelligently. He notices when energy shifts. He notices when words and actions don't align, and he addresses it without hysteria. He asks questions. He observes responses. He makes decisions based on patterns, not promises. He doesn't accept breadcrumbs. He doesn't negotiate for bare minimum respect. He doesn't stay in situations that require him to shut down his instincts just to keep the peace, because he understands something fundamental. Peace built on denial is not peace. It's slow erosion dressed up as patience. This man doesn't fear being alone. He fears being with someone and still feeling alone. He fears compromising his truth for someone else's comfort. He fears looking back in 5 years and realizing he spent half a decade ignoring what he knew from day one. And that's the man you need to become. Not perfect, not invulnerable, not emotionally detached, but clear. Clear about what you will and will not accept. Clear about the difference between love and performance. Clear about your own value. Because here's the thing they don't tell you. You can't love someone into integrity. You can't negotiate someone into respecting you. You can't perform your way into being chosen by someone who's already choosing elsewhere. The only thing you can control is whether you stay in a dynamic that dishonors you. And staying doesn't make you loyal. It makes you complicit. Leaving doesn't make you cold. It makes you honest. Demanding truth doesn't make you controlling. It makes you self-respecting. And self-respect in a world that constantly asks you to shrink, tolerate, and endure is the most radical thing you can practice. So here's your action plan. Stop analyzing her. Start analyzing your own patterns. Why are you tolerating this? What belief are you holding that says you don't deserve better? What fear is keeping you locked in place? Is it fear of being alone? Fear of starting over? Fear of admitting you were wrong about her? Name it, sit with it, and then decide, is this fear bigger than your respect for yourself? Is this fear more important than your truth? If the answer is no, then you already know what you need to do. You need to have the conversation. You need to state what you see. You need to require honesty. And you need to be prepared to walk if honesty doesn't show up. And if she gets defensive, if she turns it around on you, if she makes you the villain for simply asking for clarity, that's your answer. People who are innocent don't respond to questions with attacks. People who have nothing to hide don't treat transparency like a threat. You are not crazy for noticing. You are not weak for feeling. You are not wrong for requiring truth. You are waking up, and waking up in a relationship that's built on you staying asleep is going to feel like conflict. But it's not conflict, it's clarity. And clarity, even when it's painful, is always the right move. Here's what I want you to understand deeply. You are not a prisoner of her choices. You are not a passive recipient of whatever reality she constructs. You are an active participant in your own life. And that participation begins the moment you stop accepting what doesn't align with who you are. You don't have to be angry. You don't have to be bitter. You don't have to be vindictive. You just have to be honest. With yourself first. About what you see. About what you feel. About what you're willing to live with. And then with her. Without apology. Without pleading. Just truth. And if the truth ends the relationship, then the relationship was already over. You're just the one honest enough to stop pretending. You are not the problem. Your awareness is not the problem. Your instincts are not the problem. The problem is a culture that taught you to distrust the only compass you were born with. The problem is a dynamic that requires your confusion to survive. The problem is a narrative that asks you to sacrifice clarity for the illusion of connection. But you don't have to live in that narrative anymore. You can choose differently. You can choose yourself. You can choose truth. You can choose to walk away from anything that requires you to be less aware, less honest, less whole. That choice won't always feel good, but it will always feel right. And right is the only foundation worth building on. So here's what I need you to do right now. Not tomorrow. Not when you have more evidence. Right now. Decide that you will no longer ignore what you see. Decide that you will no longer apologize for your instincts. Decide that you will no longer stay in spaces where your truth is unwelcome. You are the answer. Not her validation. Not her explanation. Not her return to who she used to be. You, your clarity, your standards, your willingness to honor yourself even when it costs you comfort. That's power. That's freedom. That's self-respect. And if you need more of this, more truth, more clarity, more reminders that you're not crazy for seeing what you see, then subscribe now. Because this channel doesn't coddle, it doesn't sugarcoat, it doesn't sell you fantasies, it tells you what's real. And you're going to need that voice when the world tries to convince you that noticing is the same as being broken. You're not broken. You're awake. And there's a whole community of men here who are waking up with you. Men who are done pretending, done performing, done shrinking. This is where you belong. This is where the truth lives. Stay here. Keep coming back. You're going to need it. We all do. You've got this. But only if you choose yourself. So choose.